Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Women in Publishing Summit. I'm Alexa Bigwarf, your host. I'm really pleased to bring you one of our bronze sponsors, Authors in Media. Mary O'Donoghue has 12 seasons of experience on The Oprah Winfrey Show as a post-producer and associate director, plus years on NBC Nightly News, The Today Show, and Meet the Press, and stints in local TV news and radio. She is the definition of a media insider. But her decades of experience in media haven't been all behind the scenes. Mary is also a best-selling author and parenting expert who has been featured in television, radio, print, and online interviews. In fact, a single media interview catapulted Mary's book, When You Say Thank You, Mean It, to a bestseller status on Amazon in 12 hours, not only becoming the #1 in parenting, but also breaking into the top 100 overall out of 1,000,000 books. So this is the kind of stuff we want to learn how to do. So one strategic media interview can turn your book into a bestseller. That's very exciting. And I can't wait to dig into the tips on that. So Mary is, as a media insider and bestselling author, a uniquely qualified teacher of how to become the go-to expert in media without having to spend all the money to hire a publicist, because that can get so pricey. So thank you so much for being here with us today. First of all, this is such an important topic especially we are focusing on nonfiction authors today.
Right.
Yeah, and that's your business focuses primarily on nonfiction authors, correct?
Yes, it does. Yes, because the media looks at a nonfiction author as an expert. And so a nonfiction author, when they're booked, are going to be in a position to serve the media outlet's audience, to inform, to educate, to entertain, to inspire. A fiction author, on the other hand, the interview is going to be focused on that fiction author rather than focused on serving the audience for the most part. Fiction authors tend to be booked when they're famous already. Right. They tend to be booked as celebrities. The other way fiction authors can get media interviews is locally. So if you're in Chicago and you pitch yourself to WMAQ, the NBC station in Chicago, you're local, and so you have a better chance. That doesn't mean you'll get an interview for sure, but that local angle is very important to newspapers, magazines, TV and radio shows that are actually recorded in that community. So that's an edge that you can have either way, but that's really one of the most effective ways for fiction authors to get media.
So with nonfiction authors, then you mentioned that the stations will be looking at them from the perspective of teaching or providing something to their audience. So can we do just kind of a couple scenarios of types of books? You mentioned yours. Let's just start with yours. Yours was a parenting book. So how did you use that to get into the media?
Okay, so my book is called When You Say Thank You, Mean It. It came out in October of 2010. It's traditionally published. And so it's a month-by-month guide to raising children with extraordinary character. So there's January's Gratitude Month, February is Self-Respect Month, etc. So it goes down the road. So I could pitch any one of those topics to the media. For example, I could pitch, and I worked with publicists as well, which we can talk about, but I could pitch that, do you ever get frustrated that you have to tell your child how to say, to say thank you all the time? You never have to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Join us with parenting author Mary O'Donoghue, who's going to talk about, that subject kind of thing. So that's the way to get in, is to find a topic or pain point. Marketers always use those words, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pain point. When you're a nonfiction author, think in terms of the pain point of your audience as it intersects with the pain points of a media outlet's audience. So for example, if it's a parenting magazine, then it's, that's your audience already. They serve your audience. And so their audience is already interested in addressing their pain points. And one of the pain points of being a parent, I'm a mother of two, is that, I would say over and over again, what do you say? Hey, what do you say? Say thank you. And then my son was 5, and my husband and I came to the realization that it wasn't working, because he received a gift of a t-shirt. He opened it up, he's 5. He's thinking it's a toy or game. Opens it up, he sees a t-shirt. He literally drops it to the floor. Walks out of the room, dragging the ribbon was around his ankle, dragging the wrapping. And I turned to my friend and I'm like, sorry. And then I'm calling after, hey, what do you say? I mean, it was a mortifying experience. And I sort of had this parenting epiphany that I've said, at age 5, I'm sure I've said hundreds of times to my son, say thank you. Clearly that approach doesn't work. Yet that's the traditional approach. So I decided not to tell him to say thank you, but instead to teach him about gratitude, because focusing on the words, I realized it was training him to act thankful and not teaching him to be a grateful person. So I shifted my whole approach with parenting for my kids. This happened when they were 10 and my daughter was 5. I kind of came up with this whole system for focusing month by month on different, qualities like gratitude, compassion, self-respect, respect for others, etc. So as an author, then I could pitch any one of those things around a pain point, right? So, what happens when, one child does something that hurts another child? Okay, let's talk about forgiveness, and let's talk about saying you're sorry. Don't say you're sorry until you're really ready. So all of these different things would address pain points. So it was actually very easy to pitch all of the different ideas, because media outlets who served parents, these parents were dealing with all of these issues. So finding the pain point is so key. Any pain points that you can address, because that media outlet wants to address those pain points for their viewers or listeners or readers, so that they get more viewers, listeners, and readers. So that's really the key. How can you help that media outlet serve their audience?
Well, I can speak from the parenting side. Just listening to your book, I'm taking a mental note. Get this book. I have 3 kids, and just last Christmas we had a very similar experience with my 9-year-old, where her grandma bought her like a pair of riding boots or something, which is awesome, but it was Christmas and she thought she was getting a box of something more exciting than a pair of boots. What happened next was not awesome. So I get it. But no, so your point is so perfect though. If I was in the audience listening to that, or picked up a magazine as I'm waiting at the dentist office or whatever, that would immediately draw my attention to the article, to the broadcast, to whatever the media outlet is like, oh my gosh, my kid, I'm saying say thank you every day. How do I make this part of my reality? So I see how that would and then, so I'm assuming then it's, in this case, it was about largely what you're teaching in your book, but how did you put your book into that for people? Did you talk about your book at all in the interview? If it was a media outlet, would you talk about the book, or how do you incorporate that into it?
Sure. I would always bring 3 copies of my book to a television interview, for example, because television stations have green rooms. And there are other authors who may have huge social media followings who are going to be in those green rooms with you. So I always gave my book to other authors. If they weren't parents, I would say, pass this along to someone who's a parent, and then they would take a picture with me, etc. Nice. This was in the early days of social media. This would be, some years ago, but because my book's been out for about 10 years. But so that's one thing that you can do. But I also made sure I had a copy of my book. I would send one in advance, or, that one would be sent to them. But I would make sure I had a copy of the book as I walked out into the studio, in case there wasn't one. Because, typically they're going to want to show a shot of it. Because in a media interview, the focus isn't necessarily on your book from the media's point of view, but we want to convey to our audience that we're pretty savvy. We have booked an expert here, and you're going to want to pay attention to what she says. So we want to convey your expertise as an author. So heck yeah, we're going to show your book, because it also looks good to us, right? It looks good that we have booked someone who's knowledgeable, who's, a credible source. And so we're going to highlight your book. We're going to say, and she's the author of When You Say Thank You, Mean It. Mary, let's talk about this. So they're going to show a picture of my, a graphic of my book. But then it's not going to be like, so Mary, tell us what's in chapter 1. We're not talking about the book. It's going to be, hey, Mary, well, what do you do about when your child says thank you and it's very insincere? I mean, how do you get them to say thank you? And then I would address that, or whatever the question was. And so that's really key. Like, be prepared. Come with that book. Come prepared to highlight the book, but that is not the focus of the interview. And then at the end, they'll almost always say, hey, so Mary, how can people get your book? So you can say, go to Amazon, go to this store, go to that store, however you want to say it, or it's available. Sometimes authors it's available on my website, or whatever you want at the end. I tell people have one call to action at the end of the interview rather than, and follow her on Twitter and follow her on Facebook. That's confusing to the audience. So one call to action is highly effective. And it may be buy my book, or, some authors can use things like, and she has a wonderful parenting quiz, as an example. She has a wonderful parenting quiz on her website. So go there to find out, what issue is the biggest thing that you're challenged with your children. I don't have that, but I'm just using that as an example. So if your goal is, I want to sell my book in this interview, at the end, you can say, hey, Mary, where's your book? Oh, it's available on Amazon, or wherever you want to say. But if your goal...
So do they ask you what you want the call to action to be? Do they say, or do they just come up with this on their own?
No, you do not want them to come up with stuff on their own.
Okay, good to know.
Direct this.
Okay, good.
So here's something that people probably don't realize. So in a control room, which is where I would be as a post-producer during a talk show, because I've worked on a ton of them, including Oprah and a bunch of others. But so in the control room, the producer for the show is sitting next to me. I'm the post-producer. I'm going to deal with the show after it's taped, and then if things have to be taken out or tightened up or whatever. So that producer is talking to the executive producer. And one of the things they're saying before pretty much every show is, okay, we're about to interview Alexa. Is there anything like that she has to have? Because it's very important to me, right? Because I'm going to be the one in charge of cutting this interview if it's long, and they almost always are. So I need to know, is there something that must be kept in? And then the producer will say to the executive producer, yes, she absolutely wants to say at the end that she has a quiz for authors. Mm-hmm. And so she wants to send people to her website. Okay. Or yes, her book is available for pre-orders right now. So she really wants to be able to say her book is available for pre-orders. So I want people to not be passive. So yeah, participate, have an intention about your media interview, and be unafraid to say, I would really like to share this very important detail, this call to action you don't have to call it a call to action. Just say, it's extremely important to me that I let people know my book is available for pre-order, or whatever the thing that's extremely important, because they'll do that most of the time. And then somebody like me will make sure not to take it out.
So let's back up a tiny bit then, because there's two key things that I want to make sure that we address, because we jumped right into it, assuming the person has the media. How do you get to where we're at? But even, I guess we'll just continue going backwards. So I'm glad you said that about the confidence, because I know for me, as part of my story, we had twins that were born early. One of them passed away. And we became really huge advocates for the March of Dimes. And we were one of the ambassador families. So I've never gone on media as an author, but I have gone on media as a mother and an advocate for an organization. And I've been there. And it was so terribly intimidating. So I can't even imagine. And I was doing all the work for an outside organization. I can't even imagine how scared I'd be if I was in there trying to promote myself so what are some tips about that, like how you can own the interview and know what to know?
Okay, I always ask my students, when you do a media interview, imagine it's a car ride. Are you the driver or the passenger? Mm-hmm. They always say, well, I'm the passenger. And I say, no. You are the driver. You are the driver, because nobody can make you say anything you don't want to say. Now, media interviews with authors are typically not adversarial like that, but people can get distracted. So a detail can distract them. And then they can sort of ask you about something. So imagine if you and I are driving in the car, and I'm driving and you're in the passenger seat. You could say, oh my gosh, there's the prettiest blue house down the street, Mary, we should go see it. And I can say, Alexa, we are on a schedule. We have to be at our friend's house in 5 minutes. If we get distracted down the street, we're not going to get there. So I maintain that ownership of the fact that we have an agreement to get somewhere in a certain amount of time, and I'm going to get us there. I'm driving the car. So it's the same way with the media interview. If you say something, if you get distracted by a detail and then you go sort of off on a tangent, I don't need to do that. I don't need to derail my interview. And I'll give you an example. And this is something that authors do to themselves really without realizing it. So we have something called a media bio. So a media bio is different than the bio at the back of your book. So that bio is going to say, you know, Susan Smith lives in Seattle with her husband, you know, Fred. They're, you know, 3 corgis and they're 7 boys. Okay, right? So let's say that's what's on the back of her book. And then as the interview, I'm going to say something like, wait, you have 7 boys? What?
Right.
Now, or, oh my gosh, I grew up with corgis. I'm from Seattle, or whatever the heck it is, right? Any of these things that can distract. I teach the authors I work with that your media bio is a brand ambassador. That bio actually is going to steer the interview from the beginning. That's a powerful little bit of information. And what's lovely about a media bio is that if I'm interviewing you and you're an author, I read your bio. You read my bio at the beginning of this interview. And what that does is it conveys authority. So if I'm a media person and I'm reading your bio, I'm stating you are this person. I'm backing this up, right? Because I'm saying it. I'm not saying, hi, welcome to the show, Alexa, introduce yourself. I'm actually the person, the anchor woman, the reporter, the journalist, the host. And I'm saying, we have Alexa on today, and let me tell you about her. Alexa is this, this, and this. So now I'm touting your authority. So it's something that people miss, but it's very important. So, and the wonderful thing is, you get to say what you'd like your bio to be. And not in a, I must be introduced this way sort of way, but in a helpful sort of way. Because in media, we've been downsized so much. When I worked for the Oprah show, I was one of 3 post-producers. We had our own editor, assistant editor in each of the separate rooms. And we would all sometimes work on the exact same show together, you know, splitting up the segments because we were on deadlines a lot. I then worked in here in Nashville on a show called Pickler and Ben with a lot of Oprah folks. And I was one person doing the same jobs.
Oh my gosh.
I had the exact same, roughly the exact same amount of shows that we worked on back at Oprah here in Nashville, but there was just one me. I was a senior post producer, and now I had to go from edit room to edit room. So you see, there's very little processing time because folks are so busy. So when somebody is incredibly busy and you know that inside information, if you generously and respectfully offer information like, hey, here's my bio, and you know that this bio can be read in 10 to 15 seconds, like, you know, 10, 12 seconds ideally, right? You want a short, I call it a short form media bio. Then you have just gotten in that car and turned the keys. You are, I don't say in control of that interview because anything can happen, right? You can slip on a soft device. But what I do say is you are directing, like a conductor directing. You've taken ownership of this. When I used to do media interviews for my parenting book, you know, 8, 10, 9 years ago, whenever, I remember being in a green room at WGN in Chicago. I used to live in Chicago. And there was a lovely author in there. We were chatting. I gave her my book and I had some sort of props or something. And she was asking me about that. And I said, oh, I'm going to be talking about this, this, and this during this interview. And I said, well, what are you going to, and she said, oh, that's interesting. And I said, what are you talking about today? And she said, I don't know, whatever they want to talk about. And I thought, ooh, okay. She has a passive approach to a media interview. I have an active approach. Very, very important, because all of the intention that you put into this interview can determine what you walk out that day with. Mm-hmm. So I tell people that a media interview is a marketing asset that somebody else pays to create. I showed up at WGN, a massive, massive reach. That television, it's based in Chicago, but they have like international reach. Mm-hmm. So I show up prepared to do an interview that's going to be a marketing asset for my book and business. But when you show up in a very sort of passive, unintentional way, here's what happens. One of two things will happen, because I've seen more than 10,000 media interviews in my career. So I've seen categorize what happens. Either you had a nice chat and you walk away with a souvenir, or you walk away with a marketing liability that somebody else controls because you've said things you didn't mean to say because you weren't prepared. You know, maybe got upset, or I've seen people get upset when they've been ask a question, and then I'm thinking, how can I edit that out? Oh my gosh, that was a really important question. And then they got upset or defensive, or there's so many things that can go wrong when people aren't prepared. And then, you know, they walk out with this liability, and that souvenir, you think, oh, well, you know, no harm, no foul. Wait a minute. Remember, it's a marketing asset potentially that somebody else pays for. You could walk into a talk show and $100,000 might be being spent that day on a national talk show.
Wow.
Who wouldn't want $100,000? Here's $100,000 for your marketing budget. What would you like to do with it? I mean, I think people would prepare, right? And it's free. It's free. So you walk in there and, you know, so I walked in with that mindset of being a behind the scenes TV person and understanding the resources that pay all these people who are here. I'm walking into this established infrastructure with a big audience that I didn't have. And so I want to bring value. So that was always my focus. How can I bring value? Do I bring props? You know, do I, you know, bring some sort of demonstration? What can I do that really brings value to this audience so that my interview will be valuable to the media outlet, valuable to their audience and mine, and valuable to me as the author? So I always call it a win-win-win.
So, you know, the questions that I'm imagining myself, you know, being interviewed by like Hoda or somebody one day, you know, go for the big ones, right? So how do you, as they're asking you the questions, like, how do you steer the conversation to get the questions that you want to come out of it?
Okay, so if you're at a Hoda level, that's a little bit different than if you're at your local.
It's probably scripted.
Well, it's pre-produced. So
okay.
If I'm being interviewed by a local news station and there's a producer named Jane, okay, and Jane, let's say I pitch Jane, she says, oh my gosh, this is great. We would love you to be on the show next Tuesday, this time, whatever. I go there, I show up, I do the interview. You know, between the time she books me and the time I show up, there's a confirmation email, you know, that you send out. Yes, I will be at the studio at 8:30 a.m. Here's the address. You know, I understand I have to do my own hair and makeup, blah, blah. So I make sure like I'm very clear in everything. I understand there's parking, you know, whatever. I have to bring my ID because I'm not going, if you go into an NBC, ABC, CBS, any of those stations, you have to walk in with a picture ID. You don't have a picture ID, they're not letting you get past security. So you have to do certain things, right? So I confirm all of that. And then I'll say, I would, you know, since we're going to be talking about, let's say I was going to be talking about forgiveness, I would say, I'm going to bring a beach ball to this interview to illustrate that forgiveness for, if a child is upset about a friend for some minor infraction and they think, oh, it's really not that big of a deal, but I'm mad at him. It's sort of like carrying around a beach ball all day. Now, it's light, but it's still burdensome. So holding on to a grudge, as minor as it might seem, is still a burden you're carrying. And so to illustrate that, I'm going to bring a beach ball. So the producer knows I've got a prop. And then I can say, there are 3 tips I'd like to talk about, you know, how to teach your child to apologize when they're ready. And then tip 1, tip 2, tip 3. Okay, so I lay it out. And I put my media bio in there. And then I'll say, and at the end of the interview, I would love if we direct people to my website. Let's say that's what I wanted, right? And my website is such and such. All that's in the email. Okay.
Oh, great.
So I had this happen. So this is how you influence your media interview. Okay. By contributing to, you're co-creating this interview with a producer. Now, this is at a local level. It can be a little different for the Today Show. But so you do that, she or he is super appreciative because they're doing 5 people's jobs. Right. And then they forward that information to the graphics person who like makes sure to type up your name right and all of that, right? So I was doing an interview in St. Louis and I had cards as a prop, matching cards, you know, to make sure the emotion is matching what the words are, right? And to illustrate that point. And when I was being interviewed, I remember thinking, this is like one of my best interviews. Like I'm totally nailing all these questions. And then I glanced over and I saw that this anchor man in St. Louis had my confirmation email in front of him and was interviewing me off my own email. So I was essentially producing. Don't necessarily advise people try to produce their own segments without understanding,
Right.
like I do. But I hadn't even realized I was producing. I like walked out of there going, I literally walked out and thought, I could teach other people how to do this. I wasn't doing much back then.
And Authors in Media was born, right?
But the interesting thing is, so let's say we're talking a national talk show or a Today Show, Good Morning America. There's a different layer to those kinds of national shows. And it's called a pre-interview. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a Good Morning America producer and I'm going to be interviewing you, Alexa, then I would call you, or someone on my producing team would call you. Okay. And we would say, hey, we're going to be talking about this topic. So Alexa, I'm just wondering, and I start to ask you questions. Now, it's either being recorded or they're typing and taking notes. But it's very common that it's recorded, Okay. I'm pre-interviewing you. And then you say something like, oh, well, I don't want to say this. I don't know if I should say this, but X, Y, Z. And it's really interesting. And I say, well, why would you hesitate to say that? Well, because I don't know if I'm the authority on this topic. And I would say, actually, I think your perspective would be really interesting. If you're willing to say that, we would love to ask you about it. You could say, okay, I feel comfortable typing. That's going in the interview. So I kind of say, I want to talk to you about this. So maybe I ask you about something, and then maybe your answer is like not what I was thinking it was going to be. And I'll say, you know what, we probably won't talk about that. And then maybe you have a detail in your book that's, it's a brand new book that's coming out, and it's, something we weren't expecting. Maybe you're kind of an influencer on social media, or you're sort of well known or something. And there's this detail that's going to come out that we're going to be the ones who have the scoop on Good Morning America. So then I'll talk to you about that and how we're going to, reveal that, etc. And then after we get all that straight, we hang up, and then as the producer, I start producing that. And I put a document together where I'm like, hey, we're going to ask her about this. Here's her intro. It's going to be in script because they're going to read it right off a prompter. Mm-hmm. And here's question 1, and here's question 2. And let's say that there is a photo or a video that you're going to refer to. So question 1 might be, so tell us about when the video was recorded, when you had this experience. And then you're talking, and then we have a note when she says, we were at the park, roll the video. So we have, I want to call it a script, because verbatim, we don't know what you're going to say. Right. In the control room for talk shows, national shows, morning shows, because I worked on the Today Show as well. We have sort of bullet points. We have an idea of what you're going to say, not because we're trying to hyper control it, but because in a live show, especially, we need to know as much as possible what you're going to say, so that if there are graphics or pictures or anything, we put them in at the right time, because otherwise it's going to look messy and sloppy and confusing, and we want to have a very high standard of excellence. So that's why you're going to be pre-interviewed, so that we all together are creating that segment live when it's happening. If we don't know what you're going to say, that's like a lawyer, interrogating someone in court and having no idea. Like they always say, a good lawyer doesn't ask a question when he or she doesn't know what the answer is going to be already. Same thing with producing. That anchor person is not going to just randomly ask you a question for the most part, unless they have a sense of where you're going with it. Mm-hmm. Because these are timed, they're not random, Yeah. So the two very different experiences at the local and national level. At the national level, you may or may not be able to say, I want people to go to my website and do a quiz after. Probably not. But you could certainly ask. You could certainly say, is the anchor person, or may I mention that my book is available on pre-order, or whatever it is, or your book's coming out next week, something like that. Yeah, you can ask, but you're still driving. Yeah. The person who's interviewing you, that person in the driver's seat on the Today Show, Good Morning America, one of those type shows, they've been down this road before. Yeah, I'm sure. They know this road a lot better than you, and they're going to be directing as you go. They're going to be, hey, go here, go here, go here. I still tell people, you do have, again, you have influence, right? I saw an interview with an author who's a celebrity whose book I had in advance. And there was something really juicy in there. And I watched the live Today Show interview, expecting this to come out. And it didn't. At the end of the interview, I thought, wait, what happened? Like, I read that thing about that guy and that whatever in the book, and then he didn't say it. So afterwards, I reached out to the agent who I knew and said, hey, why didn't they talk about XYZ? And she said, they didn't ask. And I said, did they ask in the pre-interview? And she said, yes. And I said, why didn't your client bring it up? And she said, well, he didn't bring it up because he didn't know he was driving the car. And this is a celebrity who's in media all the time, but he never talked about his book before. And so you have to really sort of understand, you're sitting there, they're not asking you, but yet this is the thing you're there to talk about.
Right.
You are, you can say, but it was really hard was when I had to reveal this to my family or whatever the heck the thing.
Right.
So you are co-creating this media interview with the people in the control room, with the director, et cetera, with the person who's interviewing you. It is never a passive situation, because if it is, then the interview's happening to you.
Yes.
I don't want to do anything that's just happening to me, right? You and I are having a conversation, but if you ask me a question that, I couldn't answer or I felt was not, going to be helpful, I can redirect the conversation. And so the person being interviewed really has far more influence over the final product than they realize.
So it's really important to prepare is what I'm hearing. It's really important to be prepared. And because I think the thing with a lot of nonfiction authors is that we are the experts in whatever we've written our book on. So I think a lot of times we take that for granted. Like, I could answer anybody's questions about this topic, but it's different when you're trying to consolidate it into 2 to 3 minutes and you need the key things to be asked and mentioned. And so I'm sure in your program, you're also teaching the preparation and all of those things, correct?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So most people want to start with pitching, and that's, totally understandable, because if we were talking to an inventor or somebody had a physical product, and they wanted to be on Shark Tank, they'd be talking about, how do I get on Shark Tank?
Right.
But the worst is sort of be careful what you ask for, right? Because if you get on Shark Tank and you are not prepared, oh my.
You'll be eaten alive.
It's just a nightmare, because those sharks are asking you questions, and if you can't answer them, if you're not prepared, that's a massive wasted opportunity. You've now created a marketing liability for your business that lives forever. I always tell people, a media interview is permanent. It's as permanent as the people who own it want it to be. So you could do an interview 10 years ago that's still available on the internet. So it's like when the teacher would tell you, or the principal would tell you in 3rd grade, this could go on your permanent record. Media interview is a permanent record. So people are very focused on getting that interview, but I always say, let's step back several steps. Let's get the ducks in a row first, so that you create a marketing asset for your business. And then think about the fact that it's permanent. A permanent, pretty much, marketing asset for your business that can help you for years and can help you get more media. Because once you do one that's effective, that then can serve as, a way to show, hey, not only are you credible as an expert on your topic, but you're good in media too. Like, you can do an interview, you're comfortable on camera, you know how to talk. So, you know how to talk in a way that's appropriate for a media interview. So it adds to your credibility for the media.
So we did do this exactly backwards. I mean, we started with in there. So, the pitch is obviously something that is hugely important, but I'm kind of glad that we did that backwards, because it illustrates the fact that there's a lot of preparation to do before you just start throwing your concept out to the wind. But can we just spend a couple minutes talking about the pitch?
Of course. Yeah. And so when you're pitching yourself, and you don't need a publicist for the most part.
Oh, good. I was going to ask that question, because it seems like they are so expensive.
Well, yeah, there can be. And the other thing is, there's more than 1 million. I read the other day, I'm trying to think of the source, so forgive me, I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, but I read the other day that there was something like 4 million books that came out in 2019, I believe.
Wow.
4 million, like that's insane, right? So there are not enough publicists on the planet to handle all those books. So first of all, it's not necessarily an option that there would be a publicist that would be available to handle all of the books. Okay, so that's the first thing. But secondly, we have to think in terms of what publicists do. Publicists are going to have the correct contacts to reach out to in the media and be able to match you. They're going to have the expertise where they can say, you know, this particular story would be ideal for this magazine, for example, or this television show or this podcast. So that is expertise. And then they need to be able to write individual pitches, not blanket pitches. Mm-hmm. Lord in heaven, not press releases. We do not do press releases.
Do not do press releases.
No. And this is what I tell people. Having a press release is like standing on the side of a river and announcing to the fish that you have a new fishing pole. Like literally.
That bad.
It's like, look at this. I have this new thing. You want to hook. You want to, you know, have something that's going to draw them in. A press release informs, but a pitch persuades. Okay. So if you're, you know, trying to market your book, would you rather use information or persuasion?
Persuasion.
Yeah, I'm going to go for persuasion every time. And so that's really the key. A press release is really more of an announcement. So it might be, you know, there's this really cool product that this company in Silicon Valley is just launching today. That's a press release. That's perfectly fine. But saying, you know, my client has written this book about this topic, so what do we care, right? So I tell people working on like a talk show is sort of like working in any kind of busy office, even a like a surgeon or something. It's sort of like an executive producer in that they have everybody coming at them and they always need something, right? They're busy. And then you can imagine running alongside a surgeon as they're about to go into surgery and saying to her, hey, I've got this great thing I want to sell you or whatever. You know, they're not gonna be able to listen. So in TV, you have people who are not saving lives, definitely not, but super like busy and a lot of demands placed on their time, people coming from all directions needing things, right? So these high level TV executive producers, for example, are going to have just tremendous, you know, people needing them all the time.
Right.
And so the idea is when you want to get media attention is you don't want to sort of go at people who are super insanely busy and tell them things. You want to help them.
Yeah.
That's what they need because they're working like, and you don't pitch an executive producer as just an example, but if you're talking about a show producer or a columnist who writes for a magazine or newspapers, if you're trying to pitch them, you need to think about how can you make their day easier? Mm-hmm. Because like a columnist is writing maybe 6 columns per week for a newspaper. How can you make his job easier? You know, well, you can read his column at least 3 times and say, well, you know, this guy writes about this, this, and this. Okay, interesting. My topic could fall into this. And you reach out, you know, and you say, hey, Miguel, you know, I read your column regularly, and I noticed the other day you were talking about subject X. I'm actually an expert in that topic, although I have a different take, or I'd add to, I have something I can contribute to this conversation, or as it, you know, something as it, you know, some twist or something like that. Letting them know that you consume that media is very helpful because most of what we get is, you know, pitches, we get pitches that are like, I'm hoping you can help me. No.
Or are just straight like promo, like there's no even attempt to, or that makes 0 sense whatsoever for the outlet.
Exactly. Right. And that's a pet peeve too.
Yes.
Who's a radio executive producer. And she would get pitches that say, hey, either from a publicist saying my client, or from, an author or somebody saying, I want to be on your show, blah, blah, blah. And she'd be like, we don't have guests.
or this is a Christian radio station, and I don't think our readers are going to buy your book about atheism.
Right. Match up. Or sometimes, like in her case, she did multiple shows. And so they say, hey, we want to be on your show. And she'd be like, which show?
Right.
Producing 4 shows. I don't know which one you're talking about. And so taking that time to consume that media at least 3 times, read it, watch it, listen to it, is respectful. Yeah. And, we call it the media, like it's a monolith, like it's just one unit, but it's just people like us, right? It's just people.
Yeah.
And, we're just doing the best we can. And so when someone approaches us in a respectful way, that's really creates an open door, because if you're saying, hey, I've seen your work and I love it, or it's benefited me, I've gotten a lot out of listening to your podcast, or whatever it is, that's like, well, thank you, because it's really hard to create this content. And it means something that another person is letting me know that my work has had an impact on them. Yeah. And then for you to say, as the author of this book, I actually have written about that, and I can add something to the conversation. I'd love to talk about the tips for, to do whatever this thing is, tips for a better relationship with your spouse during the pandemic or whatever. Mm-hmm. Here's tip 1, tip 2, and tip 3. I would love to talk to you more about it. Here's how you reach me. That's a pitch. People get very intimidated by pitches, but a pitch is one human being reaching out to another human being, saying, I've seen your work. I appreciate it. Here's who I am. Here's what I have to offer. Here's a couple of bullet points. Here's so you can reach me. That's what a pitch is. So that's why I say you don't need a publicist. You need to really learn how to write effective pitches. Right. That's kind of a very basic formula, but you need to learn how to communicate. You need to put the time in to consuming the right media, and to being really thoughtful about where your audience is and what media outlets match up. Because when you do get to that interview, you want to be ready. Yeah. So it's not just all about the pitch. But too many media folks, me included, get pitches that are all about, how can you help me?
Right.
Like, are you kidding? It's 4:00 and I haven't eaten breakfast yet.
Right. I am not about trying to help you today.
So if you just kind of understand the humanity of the person you're going to be dealing with, and think about how can I help them? I know that they talk about parenting. I know that they talk about relationships. I know they talk about finance or faith or fitness. Mm-hmm. I have something to offer, and I would like to contribute, to help them serve their audience. That's where you can meet the media halfway, is I can help you serve your audience. Yeah. That's the mindset that you need to have, rather than I need publicity, I need to sell books. Because when you do a great interview, it's like when you hear a speaker or watch a TED talk or something like that, or you're in a clubhouse room and somebody's talking, you're like, oh my gosh, that was brilliant what that person said. Mm-hmm. I want to get her book. Mm-hmm. I want to get on his mailing list. I want to listen to her podcast, whatever it is. You want more. And so sharing your expertise is really a great way to build your audience and to get book sales.
Absolutely.
Use media for marketing.
Well, I think it's one of the things that we talk about a lot of times too, like when going out in front of people, when you're trying to sell a book, like it really, really has to be about what the person, listener in this case, or reader or whatnot, is trying to get from it, not what you're trying to get from it.
That's true. That's true, because you know what? I'm a nonfiction author, and when I wrote my parenting book, I didn't say, I'm going to make so much money as I was typing. I was thinking, hey, when, I had this issue with, my daughter taking a candy bar at a store, this brought up a lesson in integrity. And then we spent a whole month working on integrity. And I want to share that with other moms. Yeah. I want to share that with other parents, because she's the most honest person in the world now. And I want to share my hard-earned knowledge and experience with somebody else because it will make their journey better.
Right.
That's why you're writing. Have that same mindset when you're doing media.
Right.
Because most nonfiction authors write out of service. They want to serve people. And by the way, nothing wrong with wanting to sell plenty of books. Nothing wrong with
right.
using your book as your platform and speaking and creating courses and doing podcasts and all of the things. It should be a source of income. I'm not saying it shouldn't. I'm just saying that when you approach the media, if you approach them like, how can you help me sell my book? You're much less likely to appeal to them. If you approach them and say, hey, I watched your show, it's really good. I think I can bring some perspective. Here's some things I can talk about. You know, would this be helpful to you? That's way different because we have to fill time, right? Airtime. We have to fill, if we're columnists, you know, column inches, space. You know, it's hard to fill time and space day after day after day after day. And so if you can come to us with something that's new or interesting or intriguing or, you know, timely, current, any of those things, then you're actually making our lives easier. So that's really the attitude you need to have because it will benefit you in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. My final question is, do you, I mean, this is an awkward question to ask, Mary, because you teach people to do this, but do you truly believe that authors can effectively use media to sell books?
Oh my gosh, sure.
And you're like, of course I do. This is what I teach people.
Well, I'll use myself as an example. So I did an interview my book came out in October of 2010. I did an interview in November on the phone in my pajamas, drinking a cup of tea while I was at home before going to work on the Oprah show one day. And then it was a print, you know, it was a columnist, a writer. And it was like 3 or 4 months later, I was out of my launch period, didn't have my, you know, launch publicist at the publishing house anymore. I was at work and my sister called me and she said, oh my gosh, you are 500 something on Amazon. Your book is 500 something. I said, oh my gosh, that's great. I was 650,000 yesterday, like something like that. So I've gained like 150,000. She said, no, 500. I said, yeah, 500,000. She said, hang up the phone and go look on Amazon. So I looked on Amazon. My book was 147 ranked on Amazon. Of all
wow.
Books. And I was like, what's happening? So then I looked at parenting. I was number 4 in parenting. And I was like, what's happening? A media interview I did back in November was published that day.
Wow.
And it was online. And so the folks reading it clicked on the link that she put to my Amazon page with my book. And they were buying my book and buying my book and buying my book.
Oh my gosh.
And I went from 650,000-ish, I don't remember the exact number, to 97 on Amazon.
On all Amazon titles.
Of all of them.
Wow. That's exciting.
Right. Went to number 1 in parenting. You know, there's all sort of gaming things.
Yeah, sure.
Game the system to be number 1 in a thing. I was number 1 in parenting. It's one of the biggest
right.
category. I did it from a media interview in which I shared my expertise. And then, just like almost all media interviews, the name of my book was available. In this case, the interview was published online and people clicked through. That's a highly effective way to become a best-selling author. But I didn't just do that. I gave a good interview.
Right.
And so, media can sell books. It made me a number 1 parenting expert, parenting author, number 1 best-selling parenting author, broke the top 100. And that happened 12 hours after the interview went live. So people tell me that you cannot sell books in media interviews. I was Amazon's number 1 mover and shaker, which I don't know if you've ever heard that term before, Alexa. I had no idea. I was at work the next day at the Oprah show. I got a knock on my door, and Jill Adams walked in, who was the Oprah show, Oprah book club producer. And she said, hey there, you mover and shaker? And I said, well, hey. And she said, you don't know what that is, do you? I moves and shakes. And she said, Mary, you are the number 1 mover and shaker on Amazon, meaning your book catapulted into the top 100 and number 1 in parenting so fast. She's like, it was like a horse just running past all the other horses. And Amazon caught it at around 300,000. They didn't even catch the movement between like 650 and 300.
Right.
They got me at about 300,000. Wait, what's happening here? And then they watched it go. And then I had additional book sales because of that, because then Amazon was talking. I said, how do you know? She said, I got an email this morning from Amazon and you're all, you know, focusing on your book. And I was like, what is happening? That was a media interview. Wow. So it's just an incredibly powerful thing. And I will share one more fun little detail as we wrap up here. As I was leaving that night when my book did go to #1, one of the other editors at Harpo actually printed it up so I could have the page like showing. He went back to the graphics department. I had the whole page that said #1 in parenting. And I was walking out and we ran into Oprah. And she said, what is going on here? Because she knew us, my friend Mike and me. And I said, and Mike said, we're celebrating. She said, what are you celebrating? And I said, my book just.
I'm the mover and shaker.
She said, how did that happen? And I'm not a religious person, you know, but I was like, God, like, I was just shocked. And so she's like, Mary, tell me what your book's about. And she's holding my hand and she's talking to me because I knew her. And, and it was just the most incredible experience. And she said, Mary, thank you so much for sharing this moment in your life with me. And I was like, oh, Oprah, thank you for sharing this moment. And I used to always call her Miss Winfrey because she's my boss, you know. Right. But there I called her, I was like, oh, Oprah. And then she gave me a big hug. She's a great hugger. And she walked away and left for the day. And I turned to my friend Mike, I'm going to need a drink. And it wasn't because I ran into Oprah. I saw her all the time. It was because I suddenly,
what a day.
I'm a best-selling author.
Yes.
I was like, I just need to like process this. So yes, media can sell books if you know what you're doing.
That's a really exciting moment, Mary. And I can't tell you how many times in this conference I have jokingly talked about like the Oprah moment. We finally have a guest who's had the Oprah moment. That's really funny. Well, do you think it matters whether people are indie or traditionally published? Do you see indie authors having the same kind of success?
Yeah, I'm traditionally published. So this was 10 years ago, right?
Right.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I was doing a webinar and I reached out to friends and asked them different questions about what do you think about, you know, different things about pitching. And I've actually just updated that webinar now with what's going on right today. But I asked them 4 or 5 years ago, is it important to have a publicist? You know, can people pitch themselves? Does it have to be traditionally published? Does it have to be, you know, Big Five or whatever, Seven Sisters, whatever? I don't know how many publishers there are now because they've all conglomerated into a couple. And the consensus 4 or 5 years ago was like, yeah, that stuff matters. So then I went back about 2 years ago and talked to some of the same friends, producers, these are very high level folks in media. And they were like, yeah, it doesn't really matter anymore.
Oh, good. That's good to know.
The shift has happened. It's because so many self-published books are of such high quality.
Yeah.
Why would the media not want to, you know, book those authors? If they're experts and they've written a high quality book, and it looks high quality and it's done well and it's written well and it's edited well and somebody's put the time and effort and professionalism into that, sure, why not? And the same thing with publicists. People don't need a publicist anymore. There's just simply, logistically, there's not enough publicists, as I said. And if you've got your ducks in a row and you have clarity about your message, then it's, you know, and you know how to pitch, you've got an advantage. So you don't necessarily need to work with a publicist. And I'll mention one last thing. A big misconception that folks tend to have about publicists is, well, I need a publicist because they're the one who has the relationship, and that's the term they use, with the person in the media. And I say, media interviews are not favors. So they're very strategically booked, you know, ways of serving our audience. So we're not interested in doing a favor of somebody that works for the show. That's not how it works. So it's not based on relationship. Your number one asset is really clarity. And clarity about, so it's not about sort of who you know, it's really more about what you know. and having absolute clarity about that. And secondly, making sure that your message is right for a particular media outlet. Because remember, I just told you, Oprah gave me a big hug and I told her about my book. Now, I had given Oprah a copy of my book when it came out months before. So the next day I called her assistant and Libby, and I was like, hey, this happened. And she's like, oh my gosh, I'll make sure your book is on her desk so she can see it. She'll love that. And so Oprah saw my book and everything. I wasn't booked on the Oprah show. Oprah was literally holding my hand while I told her about it.
Right.
That isn't a relationship. Like, that's a contact, right? She knew me for years. But I wasn't right for the show because we virtually never did parenting, and it was season 25 of 20 years. So they were doing celebrities, all of that. Right? So I wasn't a good match with that moment, and I wasn't a good match for the show necessarily. So it made total. I didn't give Oprah the book because I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to get on the show. I knew the show.
Right.
I gave her the book because she was my boss, and I was excited about it. But so it's not about who you know, because that story really illustrates it.
Yeah.
It's really about you being a good match and having clarity about your message. So that's something I'd like to leave people with, because this can be defeating for people who feel like, I'm not a celebrity, I don't have a publicist, maybe I don't have $10, $20, $30,000 to work with a publicist, because the range can be in there depending on where the publicist is and the length of time you work with them. And I have no contacts. So how am I going to get media? Have clarity about your message, know who you are, who you serve, and how you serve them. Match up well with a media outlet, and, really get those ducks in a row, learn how to pitch effectively, and pitch. And, practice what you're going to talk about, but don't memorize. Work with somebody, whether it's me or somebody else, hone your skills. Communication skills are, I think, the most valuable skills that you can possibly have, whether you're a speaker, whether, you're doing media interviews. When you're an author, you're communicating, right? Yeah. So I really think that those skills are absolutely crucial to learn, and that are really essential, in the 21st century, because we are in the information age. Information is currency these days. So that's my experience in it.
I love it. This was such a phenomenal interview. I have learned so much, but I feel like this is one of those cases where I've just learned enough that I'm ready to dig in deep for some of this stuff. I don't have a book yet that I'm ready to market to the media, but I'm working on one, because I really feel like my books up to this point have served their purpose and what they want to do. But I feel like my bigger book is yet to come. So I want to start, but do you work with authors as they are in the process of writing, or only once they're done with their book? Or I know that's kind of a random question, but the thought just came to me, if I know what
I work with authors who already have a manuscript.
Okay. And nonfiction authors.
Nonfiction, yes. Specifically, it tends to be prescriptive nonfiction. So parenting, relationships, finance, faith. I talked about fitness, exercise, diet. I work with doctors, that sort of thing. So it's something. It tends to be books that will help people.
Perfect.
It can be memoir and things like that as well. But I will work with them as early as the manuscript stage, because you can go into a manuscript and start to pull out all the media-worthy content. Because I've seen, like I said, more than 10,000 media interviews in my career, it's second nature for me. When someone's talking, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, well, what you just said, that was a soundbite, write that down. I was like, you could definitely use that in a media interview. I can hear sound bites in my sleep. I literally in a dream once said to somebody, what's the time code? That was a soundbite. Because it's a language that I speak, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I do work with authors at that stage. And I do a thing where I actually will pull out all the media-worthy content and then meet with them. And then this is all sort of the pitchable stuff, all the things they can do in interviews. Because when you send your book to the media, they're probably not going to read it. Yeah. Maybe they will. It really depends. But most likely they will not. And so you really knowing what's going to be media worthy to talk about is very helpful, because then it helps inform what you pitch and what you talk about in media interviews, and the parts of your message that get out to the world.
Mm-hmm.
As a parenting author, my book had 12 different chapters, compassion, gratitude, inner strength, spirituality, joy, forgiveness. But because my book was called When You Say Thank You, Mean It, everybody wanted to interview me about gratitude. Well, after 5 or 6 interviews about gratitude, I thought, well, this is great for these media outlets, but it's not helping me and it's not helping my audience, because now I have great interviews about gratitude that I can put on my website when I had a parenting website. But I want to talk about forgiveness now. I want to talk about how to bully proof your kids with compassion and inner strength and respect for others, or whatever it was. I want to talk about forgiveness. I want to talk about all these other things that go under the umbrella of my parenting expertise. And so kind of having a sense of what you can talk about in media is very important. So that's what I do for clients. I do that. And then I offer limited VIP days. Mm-hmm. And I teach a course. So I can work with clients and students. I teach a course can I say the name? I don't know if I don't.
Yes, you can say it, because your special offer for attendees is around your course, right?
Oh yeah, I have a self-directed course called Profitable Publicity. Mm-hmm. And that's something where it's already done and you can, do it at your leisure. That's a very budget-friendly course. It's a very time-respecting course. And that's, I was talking about doing interviews that are intentional. That teaches you how to do interviews that are intentional.
Oh, great.
It's not about pitching. It's before you pitch, you need to know those things. Mm-hmm. And then I teach a signature course, Media Success Blueprint, once or twice a year. For 8 weeks. So
great.
So that's where I teach all of the things.
Well, you can come to our question and answer session with Mary O'Donoghue about her company, Authors in Media, and working with her and all the things. We have that in the schedule on Thursday, so March 4th. Check the schedule for the exact time and location for all of our ticket holders. And they'll be able to pop in and ask you questions and get more details on your programs and all of that good stuff. So that'll be exciting. If they want to go, I believe we have all of your links that we'll share in here, but if they want to go directly to your website, it's
maryodonoghue.com, actually. Yeah.
Perfect.
That's my website. O'Donoghue has no A's in it, so it's O'Donoghue.
O'Donoghue. H-U-E.
Yes, O'Donoghue. Yeah, you pronounced it perfectly, but the spelling is that it has an O rather.
Well, thank you. Phew. I'm terrified about saying people's names wrong. So, well, this has been an exceptional interview. You've provided so much great information. I know that it's going to be super helpful to people, and they'll be so happy that they didn't make that huge chunk of investment at this point in time in a publicist if that's not the right answer for them.
Yeah, for the most part. It really depends, but yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this, and I'm so grateful to be of service to authors, because nonfiction authors are my favorite people in the whole world.
Well, thank you as a nonfiction author. And I do want to thank you and give you so much gratitude for being a sponsor of the event this year. Your sponsorship helps us keep the event at a very reasonable cost to our attendees. And you just delivered so much information to them that in itself was worth a whole huge value. So thank you.
I'm so glad. Thank you.